Kia ora koutou. We are moving on to elasticity of supply today. So elasticity of supply comes under both achievement standard 3.1 and 3.3. So 3.1 is where we're looking at the efficiency of market equilibrium. That's where we looked at consumer surplus and producer surplus allocated efficiency. And it also comes under 3.3, the microeconomic concepts. So elasticity of supply essentially means the responsiveness of changes in supply to a change in price. Remember, elasticity means responsiveness. So how responsive can producers be when the price changes? So under the law of supply, we know that when there's an increase in the price, the quantity supplied will always increase because it's more profitable for a producer. But depending on what time period we're in will depend on how responsive a producer can be. Before we look at the time periods, we're just going to recap on our factors of production. Remember, factors of production are the resources or the inputs that we use in the production process. So land, labour and capital resources that producers put together to create goods and services. So here are our three time periods. The first one is the momentary time period. So this is one moment in time. Okay, so essentially if prices increase right now, producers cannot be responsive to the price. The quantity supplied is unchanged. This is because the factors of production are fixed to whatever the producer has right now. So whatever labour, land or capital they have right now will be the factors of production of what they can use for the quantity supplied. So everything is fixed and cannot be changed. Therefore, supply will be perfectly inelastic. So an example of this would be if price increases for milk on a particular day, then the farmer's supply of milk cannot change it. They cannot be responsive to the change in the price because they have their factors of production already fixed. The second time period that we're going to look at is the short run. So the short run is where we can have one factor of production variable. So usually the factor of production that's variable that can be easily changed is labour. The factor of production that's usually fixed is usually land or capital, mainly land though, because land is quite hard to acquire. So the quantity supply can change by a little bit. So if the price increased by 10%, quantity supply might be able to increase by 5%, anything less than the 10%. Essentially, supply would be inelastic. An example of this would be in the short run, when the price of milk increases, the farmer can hire more workers and therefore more workers can increase productivity and milk more cows. So we can increase our quantity supply by a little bit. The last time period that we're going to look at is the long run. So the long run is where all factors of production are variable, so no factors are fixed. This means that the quantity supply can change a lot. Therefore, the supply would be elastic. So an example of this would be where a farmer can increase their quantity supply by a lot because they can purchase more land. Okay, they're in the long run. So essentially they can purchase more land, they can build a bigger shed, or they can buy more tractors or more milking machinery so that they can milk more cows and they can be very responsive to the change in the price. So essentially if price increased by 10%, the quantity supplied will increase by proportionally more, so something like 15%. Okay, anything more than the 10% would show an elastic supply. So to calculate the elasticity of supply, we've got two formulas. The percentage change formula, which is the percentage change in the quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Remember, to calculate the percentage change in the quantity supplied, you do the change in the quantity supplied divided by the original times 100, and you do the same for the price. So the change in the price divided by the original price times 100, and then you can divide each of those. And the midpoint formula, which is the change in the quantity supplied divided by the old and the new quantity supplied times the old and the new price divided by the change in the price. Now, using each of those formulas, you'll get a coefficient. So depending on the coefficient will depend on what time period we're in and what elasticity the producer faces. So if the elasticity of supply is 0, then the elasticity must be perfectly inelastic. and this means that the firms can't be responsive to changes in prices, and we're in the momentary time period. If it's less than 1, the coefficient, the elasticity of supply must be inelastic, and therefore firms can be somewhat responsive to price changes. We must be in the short run. If it's unitary, the coefficient will be equal to 1. This means that the firm is equally responsive to the price change. So if there's an increase in the price by 10%, then the quantity supplied would increase by 10% also. And then the last one, if the coefficient is greater than 1, the elasticity of supply will be elastic and firms can be very responsive. So this means that they must be in the long run. So this is what our graphs will look like. In the momentary time period, we have a vertical supply curve, because it shows that regardless of the price, that the quantity supplied cannot change. In the short run, we will have a steep supply curve. So if the price increases, the quantity supplied will increase by proportionally less. The farmer cannot be very responsive, so it's inelastic. And then in the long run, we will have a flat supply curve, which means when the price increases, the quantity supply can increase by proportionally more, and obviously it's elastic. So sometimes in books or workable tests, they will actually put all 3 time periods or supply curves on the one graph. Okay, so you can see here, if there's an increase in demand, which would obviously cause the price to increase in the momentary time period, then the quantity supplied remains unchanged to whatever it was before the demand increased. Okay, then you can, if you look at the short run, in the short run, the price increases, then the quantity supplied will increase by proportionally less, so a small increase in the quantity supplied, and then in the long run, the increase in the price will lead to a more than proportionate increase in the quantity supplied. Okay, so that could come up in a workbook or a test. So essentially that is our elasticity of supply covered. Hopefully this video has helped you understand this a bit better. So what you should do now is go do some practice questions on elasticity of supply to help for this to make sense. Okay, see you later. Good luck.